Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. Hey Jay, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I am doing just fine. So are you ready to get to some listener questions, comments, critiques, rants, all that kind of stuff?
Me too. Hear from the people.
Yeah. You know, before we do, just a couple of quick administrative things. If you haven't yet taken the short and simple 7-question, all optional Politics Guys survey, we'd really appreciate it if you could. It's going to help us, expand the show, make it better, more of the stuff you like, less of the stuff you don't. And you can find it just by going to politicsguys.com. It should be the top link there. So real easy to see. Also, there was one question in the survey, Jay. This happens all the time. I've done a lot of surveys, but there's almost always one or two questions that after the survey's out, I say, gosh, I wish I would have thought to include that. And sure enough, that happened this time too. So the question is this. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I've actually stopped listening to a few podcasts, not because I didn't like the content, but because there was something one of the hosts did that just was something, a verbal tick, that sort of thing, that just annoyed me so much that I said, I just can't do it anymore. And I'm betting that if I hear that with other podcasts, there are probably some folks who might hear that with us. We're not certainly absolutely perfectly polished.
Doubtful, but
yeah. There kind of I thought of it. I was saying, Jay, it was sort of the podcast equivalent of having food in your teeth, and you really want someone to tell you, but almost nobody does. And so this is me asking you if there's something like that about us, whether it's me, whether it's Jay, Trey, Ken, anyone that we've had on, that you hear that and you just fingernails on a chalkboard. Let us know, please. You can just, send us an email, mail@politicsguys.com. We would really appreciate it, because if there's some little thing like that we can change that might make the show better, we would love to do it. So thanks very much.
It may surprise a lot of our listeners, but neither Mike nor I have any training whatsoever in broadcasting.
We are not broadcast professionals, no. And finally, we are not web design professionals. I just realized about a week ago that if you go to politicsguys.com on a phone, a smartphone, a mobile device, which probably is where most people access the site these days, you actually can't find the support links unless you look really, really hard. You have to be very dedicated, which is not exactly what you want. So I fixed that, sort of. There's now a direct link. If you want to support the show financially, you can go to politicsguys.com/support. Or now I put a menu up on politicsguys.com. So for people who are accessing the site on their phones and want to support it, you can just see it as one of the menu items there. The reason that happened is I'm just middle-aged, guy who basically still does most of his internet stuff on a laptop. And so it didn't even occur to me. And when I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh. So it's sort of fixed now. It'll look a lot prettier at some point in the near future. But I just wanted to pass that along. All right, with that out of the way, before we do get to the listener questions, there was one thing I wanted to say about the big story from last week. And now Trey and Ken talked a lot about the shooting, the school shooting in Florida. There was one thing I wanted to bring up that I don't think was part of their conversation. This is something you've heard me say a lot. It's this, I guess I'd call it the rush to judgment. It's, right away, of course, there's a lot of finger pointing about the FBI and so forth. And my first question is always, well, does this have to do with incompetence, or does this have to do with institutional structure and resources? And the reason I bring this up is that I trained in political science. That's where I got my PhD, and my focus was on political institutions. And one of the things I took away from that is that oftentimes, while we have this tendency to want to blame individuals for being evil or inept or something like that, in an awful lot of cases, the problem really is with institutional structure, or with bad incentives in an institution, or with institutions that don't have sufficient resources or resources in the right place to do their job. Like, for instance, the FBI, I did a little digging, and it turns out that they get more than 100 threat reports every single day. And so there's this huge triage that has to go on. Now, do they have the resources to do that? I don't know. But the thing that troubles me is that we tend not to ask these questions, and we just talk about bloated and inept bureaucracies. And these are the sort of questions I think we need to have more of a focus on. And that's something I just wanted to point out. And this is true, not just with school shooting stories, obviously, but with a lot of cases where we feel that our institutions are failing us.
Okay.
Jay, any thoughts on that?
I think you're right in that. Let's not rush to judgment to find out exactly, to say there was, whether it's an individual, whether it's an institution or a combination thereof. Let's have an investigation and find out where the facts lead us. But to me, there's still a point of you need leadership in an agency to take a look at where these things are going.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's only these terrible mistakes that point out that there's a problem. Other times they could be visible otherwise, but we'll know that when we know that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. All right, well, let's move on to our listener mail. First is DJ, who writes, "Hey guys, I've been listening for over a year now, corresponding with Mike about his new segment. Needless to say, I'm a huge fan. I just wanted to comment on the interview with Susan Jacoby that Mike just had. She made some comments about far-right evangelicals and started laughing while speaking about their beliefs of being protected by God. It's ironic because
those goofy believing in their silly religions."
Well, so he goes on to say, it's ironic because Mike asked her about elites earlier in the show, and I think in this case, she showed in her actions why people feel like intellectuals are elitists and look down on them. I really enjoyed the interview and want to express that, but also point out that this oversight that a lot of us on the right see in those who consider themselves, quote unquote, open-minded on the left. Many times, they seem to be open-minded to everything except religion. Sometimes it even feels like they are open-minded about every religion except Christianity. I know that this view is shared by many in my circle who I would consider as moderate religious conservatives. As a self-identifying moderate religious conservative myself, one who tries very hard to be open-minded and accepting of all beliefs, it's extremely frustrating to be told by those who do not share my beliefs that I am a closed-minded, ignorant person. I think this kind of rhetoric is just as destructive and counterproductive as Trump's, and while I think populist conservatives have more outright hateful rhetoric than those on the left, I truly believe that this recent movement is a direct effect of this kind of speech and treatment from those on the left. I'm waiting for Jay. Hear from you, Jay.
Yes, no, I was gonna give it an amen, and I don't mean that in any sort of ironic sense, but no. I think that is exactly correct. And well, I'll let you finish. The letter. But
well,
yes.
he asks for our thoughts, but he says, adds, I think this is why a lot of conservatives don't trust the media, because as much as the major media outlets claim to be unbiased, they're not, and they haven't been for a long time, which is why there's a demand for something as blatantly biased as Fox News. I think he makes some interesting points, and he also asked me to pass his comments along to Susan Jacoby. And I did that, and she was gracious enough to answer. I really appreciated that. And so I wanted to read her answer to that critique of what she had to say, and then we can kind of talk about that. Here's what she said. This country is deeply confused when it comes to religion about the difference between respecting the right to freedom of religion or of non-belief and respecting the beliefs themselves. I do not respect the kind of religious belief that one sees, for example, after disasters, in which someone whose house was spared by a tornado will say, God was watching over us. Does this mean there is some reason God wasn't watching over your neighbor whose house was destroyed? I think not. And I think this is a harmful belief for society as a whole. Did Puerto Rico get nearly destroyed in Hurricane Maria because God wasn't watching out for Puerto Ricans, while Jamaica was spared because God was watching out for Jamaicans? My objection to fundamentalist religious belief, which attributes to God what should be attributed to nature, is not a matter of rhetoric, but one of profound conviction. You are entitled to your beliefs, and you are entitled to practice them with complete freedom under our secular law, but you are not entitled to my respect for those beliefs. Just as I am entitled to be an atheist and entitled to fully express my beliefs under our Constitution, but I am not entitled to your respect for the beliefs themselves. That your feelings or my feelings may be hurt when someone finds our beliefs unreasonable and or harmful is irrelevant. And by the way, this has nothing to do with liberalism or conservative. There are many politically conservative atheists, just as there are many politically liberal evangelicals. So there you go. That was Susan Jacoby's response to that. So Jay, I wanted to get your thoughts about both about DJ's comments and about Ms. Jacoby's response. What do you think?
Wow, I think DJ hit the nail on the head there, and I think Susan Jacoby just doesn't get it. That's just, this is something that troubles me daily, and I'll come that I'm not an evangelical. Um, I would call myself a practicing Christian. I was brought up Protestant, Presbyterian. My wife's Catholic. We go to church not every week, but so I'm just throwing that out there as background. But there is this sense that you get from the left that, oh, we're so smarter than you, and the the Obama comment years ago about the bitterly clinging to their guns and their religion. And people realize when you hold them in contempt. Yeah, it's something that, and I think the left doesn't get that the right gets that they're laughing. You know when people are laughing at you. And the other thing that I think that the left misses is, if you're, and again, Susan Jacoby's response just sort of solidifies where she's coming from. They often put up this evangelical straw man, that if you believe in something bigger, higher than ourselves, there's a greater purpose. Then you're just this fool who believes there's a man in the sky who's watching everything you do, and so forth. And I think religious views are a lot more nuanced than that. And whether you want to call it the more moderate religious community or the mainstream religious community, and the evangelical community. There are a lot of folks who in the cases of a natural disaster, what else do you look to? But you try to find that there's some meaning bigger than just randomness, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't. That's as President Obama once said, that question's above my pay grade. But isn't it entirely natural if your house is spared by a natural disaster, if a loved one recovers from some illness, if you are somehow survive a accident, that you would look and be thankful and say, someone's looking out for me. And again, whether you assign that as the again, I think the left tends to paint this caricature of what religious people believe, that when they say that, they mean there is a guy in robes and a white beard watching down. And look, I think everybody gets that this is more complicated than that. And it is, a tenet, I think, of almost all religions, is that God's ways are not our ways, and they are necessarily beyond our understanding. And that's the whole point of faith, is we have to have faith that this higher purpose, and whether you want to give it a name of God or whatever, is something that's bigger than us, and sort of defies our ability to really comprehend. And I think that, again, the left uses religion as just this, putting up these silly straw men arguments of, look at these silly folks who who take every word literally, and every word of the Bible literally, and they don't understand this, and they hate science. And again, it's
Well,
I'm not saying there are some
think
people aren't like that out there, but the vast majority of evangelicals, I don't think are like that. I know a lot of them; they're not like that.
Well, I think you might be painting a little bit of a straw man of the left as well. There certainly are people who, on the left, who have what I would call contempt for our religious believers. I think of someone like almost like a Sam Harris, who I love for a lot of reasons. He's a fascinating guy, but I think that's one of the things that troubles me about a lot of the new atheists, is there is this sense of contempt, and I don't think that's ever appropriate. But what I do agree with Ms. Jacoby about is not about, there's a difference between having contempt and not respecting a view that you believe to be fundamentally misguided and wrongheaded. You can certainly say, well, you are entitled to your view. But I think she's right in saying that if I believe that your view is not only wrong, and not only wrong, but actually destructive in some way of human flourishing, then, of course, I'm not going to necessarily respect it. That doesn't mean you don't have a right to that view, and I think there are plenty of liberals who understand that. Liberals who, like myself, I guess I'd characterize myself as a Buddhist Stoic sort of person. I was brought up Catholic, but I certainly don't have contempt for religious believers, but Catholics, evangelicals, what have you. But I do believe that many of them are fundamentally sort of wrong-headed in their beliefs. And if there's something I can do to show them what I think the right
But
path
that
is.
but that wasn't DJ's point. His point was when she said mentioned evangelicals, she laughed, and that's the contempt. And I think the point that DJ was making was, look, this is poisoning our rhetoric, and if you want to know why the right doesn't trust the left, this is one of those reasons, because they know that they're laughing at them. In this case, quite literally, hearing them laugh at, and when you called out on it, saying, "Well, I disagree with this. I don't respect that." Fair enough. No one's saying that she has to respect it, or that the Constitution somehow requires her to respect the religion of others. But as a practical political point, this is why we have the distrust between the different sides, and sometimes we can't communicate, is because one side is going to take that
Sure.
view.
No, yeah.
And again, I think the other point he's right about is, would she have made that same joke, or laughed off the can you believe what these Muslim folks believe?
Sure.
That sort of thing.
No, I think that's a
I mean,
a
and
fair
that's
point.
something that, yeah.
But, I also think that there are a lot of people, I like to think I put myself in this camp, who don't have contempt and don't laugh in any way at believers. If I see
Right.
somebody who, for various reasons, believes things that I think are both wrong and in some way harmful, my instinct is not to have contempt or to laugh. My instinct is to think, well, how can I make this situation better? I'm not interested in alienating people. That's a difficult thing to do, obviously, but I guess in that sense, I would agree with you that
Yeah,
isn't
but DJ's
helpful.
DJ's point was that she was.
Yeah, and I don't know that
And
I
I
would.
think there's that
Sure.
there's we're so much divided into tribes, and you sort of signal where you are to your fellow tribe members. And I think that's sort of the idea of the, hey, I'm not one of them. I'm not one of these buffoons who believe this. I'm one of the smart ones.
Now, now,
And that's a big turnoff to a lot of America.
Now, of course, some people on the left at this point would point out that, well, people on the right are always talking about PC and how people are these fragile snowflakes and so easily offended. And isn't this just an example of this playing out on the other side? And isn't this hypocrisy on the right?
No, no, no. But here's the thing, though. DJ is not saying that Ms. Jacoby ought to be somehow censored or censured for that view. That she ought to go to sort of a
Re-education.
re-education, or what do they call them in Northern Kentucky, Mike? When you get, I imagine you've got some sort of sensitivity training.
Oh, okay.
That you will have to, mandatory sensitivity training. Or is there any attempt to ban someone because they might
Sure.
raise those views? I think he's simply pointing out that this is an issue, and if you want to look at a reason why the left and the right can't talk to each other, and why there is this perception of elitism, by many on the right perceive the left as elitist and out of touch. That's one of the reasons.
Yeah. Well, I think, fundamentally I agree with that. It occurs to me that we've been doing this show for a lot of years, but we've almost not talked at all about religion and politics, at least not in depth. It might actually be something that would be worth doing for. I mean, we've already spent, quite a bit of time on this, but it might actually make for a decent show, or bring someone on or
Sure.
something like that. I didn't even realize until now that it's an area that we just really haven't touched on a whole lot, and it matters an awful lot to an awful lot of people. So that might be worth looking into, I think.
Yep.
All right, moving on. There were a number of people who commented on my conversation with Todd Feinberg about my ideological journey from right wing conservative, much further right than Jay, actually, to sort of the centrist liberal I am today. And almost all those comments were essentially variations on the same thing as, my God, Mike, you let Todd Feinberg get away with so much. Why didn't you challenge him more? And,
Everybody wants you to fight with everybody all the time.
well, I think in part, what Todd Feinberg does, I enjoyed it a lot, but what Todd does is a lot different than what Jay and I do. And honestly, in part, he is a professional, right? And he's very quick and very ready. And in part, I was just sort of blown away a little bit by that. And he's very good at what he does. I think another part of it is I'm sort of leery to try to fact check in real time, sort of thing, especially when I have information in front of me. I mean, a number of people pointed out things that he said that, I certainly would take issue with. And maybe what I should have done is sort of basically, made a list and then kind of come back at a later point. That probably wouldn't have made for very compelling radio, I don't imagine. But I think another part of it also is, Jay, that's just not fundamentally my nature, kind of going after people and challenging people. And I actually,
it used to be.
Well, yeah, it did used to be.
Again, back in your conservative days.
It absolutely used to be.
You used to lambaste me for being some kind of
mushy kind of,
pinko.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was thinking about this because, it's, you've mentioned before that people have, kind of taken me to task for, say, not challenging you more on some of the crazy things you say. And I think it probably has to do a lot with the fact that I've spent, 20 years in a classroom where my main goal is not to try to alienate and kind of be off-putting to students, but no matter what a student says, to basically say my kind of go-to remark when a student says something just bizarre is, that's interesting. Okay. And my mind works to try to say, well, how can I integrate this into some sort of larger conversation and kind of pull it away from the crazy thing that this person just said? And I think having done that for 2 decades now, that's sort of my default position when someone says something like that. So this is the case where I think my job has probably shaped me, and certainly as you just pointed out, has changed me from being a far more confrontational person to someone who tries to look for some sort of common ground to start from. At least that's sort of my take on it, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
So anyway,
just a little anecdote. Mike once gave me the advice of with the first day of the new semester or quarter, when you're going in to class and picking your seat, always choose the sit in the back in the center, because that way everybody has to turn around and look at you.
Yeah, I remember that.
Those were literally words of wisdom. But part of I think often people just come to discussions or even arguments with different expectations, that they think that there's going to be a winner or a loser. Just as, Mike and I are not going to settle on what's the one true religion in a 10 minutes, 5 minutes of a podcast, or solve the gun control discussion. It's one of those things that a lot of times in a debate there's not a winner or loser. There's also the point of sometimes discussions can just go on and on and on, especially those types when again, they've been going on for years, hundreds of years sometimes. Sometimes it's just you let the other guy have his say, and you let like in my work, you let the jury decide. That it's not there's plenty of times where in a deposition or in a courtroom, a witness will say something that you find truly unbelievable or ridiculous, and rather than just simply belaboring that point over and over and over again, you commented on it once, and then you have other witnesses and you put on other evidence and you let it go, and the finder of fact decides which is more credible. I think it's sometimes just not a great debating technique to sort of keep harping on something. So or again, I've always said, yes, when someone says something that is just on its face ridiculous, I'm happy just to sort of let that go and say, okay, well, there you go.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. All right. Let's see. Moving on, we have Connor, who writes, as a Canadian, I feel a strong connection to the U.S. and its policies. I just finished the episode following Mike's journey from right to left. I don't like to focus on where people are on the spectrum and choose to focus on individual issues, but I guess I'm a socialist at heart. Good for you, Connor. That scares people. That scares people because they hear communism, but there are many successful kinds of socialist governing bodies that even Trump likes, such as his precious Norway. My specific question is, how do you guys feel about the U.S. moving to a basic universal healthcare system that still maintains a certain kind of free market for insurance companies for non-essential health benefits like cosmetic surgeries and dental and more? Well, Connor, I think that would be a great idea. I don't think it's going to happen at any point in the near future, but I wouldn't call myself a socialist, but that's something that I think is a goal to shoot for, certainly. Jay?
Well, I obviously disagree. I think the free market is the best way to allocate goods and services. Historically, it produces the highest quality and the lowest prices. There are in healthcare issues which are make the operating of a free market anomalous. In other words, it's a difficult type of field to apply the free market principles to, because it's not as if you can always choose between, well, I'll either have the bypass or not. Nor is there the transparency that you have in other types of transactions, other purchases of, well, I'll compare this product A with product B. And you have insurance put on top of it, and nobody actually pays the price that they're charged, and there's so many layers of complexity. So my sense is, by adding more government into that, and this is just, again, the 10,000 foot view, you add more cost, less quality, and I think you can take a look at. And I don't know how everything is in Canada. But I do know. I mean, there are many British folks who have concerns, problems with the national health on those types of issues. Sometimes how long you have to wait, when you can see somebody, whether you get to see the doctor you want, all those sorts of things. So, look, I'm going to agree with you that our healthcare system. I wouldn't say. I mean, again, we've talked about this before, that for those, probably 90 some percent, it works pretty well. It's this other group that falls between the uninsured, underinsured, that we need to figure something out with.
Well, you and I, and actually people on the left and the right, there's significant agreement on a number of things here. Number one, at least I'd say most people would say that, other things being equal, markets are the best, most efficient, most effective way to allocate goods and services. Now, there are some people.
I don't think Elizabeth Warren would agree with you.
Well, I think she would, but that's another story. That's another story. But the point being is that I think most reasonable people who look into the matter would say that we don't have really, generally speaking, any better than markets to allocate goods and services. And also, the left and the right can agree that our healthcare market is a mess, a big mess, in large part because it's difficult for it to operate like a traditional market for all the reasons that you talked about. I thought that was a great summary, by the way. I think where the distinction comes in is where we go from there. And I think you articulated a conservative view very well, that if you add more government to that equation, you're going to get something that's even worse. And so in the end, you have a confidence that we might need to make some adjustments to the market, and government might need to make a role there. But fundamentally, the market would still be the way to go, just with certain adjustments given its nature.
Exactly. Yeah, you need to hit the issues where there are anomalies, where the market does the speed bumps, folks who with pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
That's something that markets can't fix, at least easily. So we'll need to, you need to work out something with that.
And in my sense,
emergency services, that's another one. Yeah.
Well, in my sense, and I think the sense of a lot of people on the left, is we are a lot less confident in the ability for the market to figure out most of these things. And so that's why I think many of us look for whether it's a public option type of insurance, whether it's a Medicaid for all type of thing, that sort of thing, where we think that fundamentally that a market-based solution is just not going to be the answer. And I think that's the fundamental break between the left and the right on that.
I'm gonna add one last little
Sure.
bit to this. Just after I got done talking about how you shouldn't just keep beating a dead horse. Um, the other I think conservative concern with creating this new entitlement is once you have an entitlement, it's there forever. It
Absolutely.
never gets smaller; it only gets bigger. There was a great piece I saw about a week ago. And I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal. Could have been somewhere else, but talking about the where the money goes of that our government spends, and the ratio of the percentage of money that is essentially transfers to individuals has risen from about, and I don't have this in front of me, so I may get the numbers wrong, but something in the neighborhood of 25, 30%, 20 some years ago, to now in the mid 60s. And I apologize if I have those numbers wrong. But it's a tremendous shift of more and more money is going to pay out these entitlements to individuals, and we're becoming closer again to we're a big insurance company with the military.
Yeah, I think
and that's the other conservative concern is when that happens. It's bad for everyone. It's bad for the government. It's bad for freedom in sense of more people becoming dependent on these payments.
Yeah, I think the liberal response to that, I know my response to that is when you said, entitlements, once they're there, they stay there. My response coming from the left is yes. And I believe there is a basic right to certain things. I believe that government has a responsibility, as do many people, my colleagues and friends on the left believe that government should provide for basic health care, should provide to make sure that people, don't basically needlessly suffer in various ways, that people have the means to lead decent, fulfilling lives. Not that they become dependent on government, but that safety net is there. And I feel that's that's as fundamental, well, not quite as fundamental a task of government as national security, because of course, without national security, you don't have anything else, but it's right up there. And so that's, I think, where we differ on that.
Okay.
All right. Moving on, we have Keith, who writes, "Hey guys, when discussing deficits, most political commentary falls into the Democrats' tax and spend. I respect Jay acknowledges nuance within that, but it's still his starting place. A graph of deficit spending as percent of GDP directly opposes the hypothesis by showing the largest deficit spenders were Republican administrations. It doesn't appear Trump will reverse this trend. It's worth noting that Obama, the highest Democrat spender, raised deficit as a percentage of GDP less than Reagan or Bush 43. Even with the biggest recession since the Great Depression, Obama inherited an economy with 10% deficit spending of GDP and left it under 4%. About half of Obama's increase in deficit spending was in the first year with the shrinking economy. I don't think one can honestly argue that 2008, 2009 was his fault. I also ran a correlation between the highest marginal tax rate and percent GDP growth since 1945. It's essentially zero. Yeah, I know. And he found it's essentially zero, no correlation. He said, obviously, correlation is a limited measurement, but if the two were related within the tax ranges tested, you'd expect at least a small relationship. Note that this doesn't include corporate tax rate, which I've seen evidence supporting the argument that cuts can have a positive effect on short-term growth. I was born in 1988, so I don't have the memory to give Reagan and Bush 1 the same perspective as Obama. How can one interpret this information and deduce A, tax cuts reduce deficits, and B, Republicans balance the budget? Though I'm not an economist, I am a scientist. I struggle to find the data supporting how we discuss the deficit problem societally. This isn't intended to be a partisan hit. Democrats are certainly flawed humans too. With deficit spending seemingly increasing under Trump as a percent of GDP, it fits into the historical trend of Republican administrations contributing more to the problem than Democratic administrations. What information or context am I missing or not considering? So, Jay, what do you think?
Wow. Well, that was really good. He's done a lot of homework there. Um, Again, I can't comment on all the numbers he's crunching there, but look, I think his sense is right in that during the Reagan era there was a deficit buildup, largely military spending. Um, I would say once you got to the uh, 90s, in that case, we actually did balance the budget when you had a Democrat president and a Republican Congress that sort of held his feet to the fire. So we had a couple years of a balanced budget I want to say 95 through 97, maybe 97 to 99. And there was even a government shutdown to sort of force that point. But there are a lot of conservatives who were unhappy with George W. Bush in that he spent a whole lot of money, and not even a lot of money when you're talking about was it Afghanistan or Iraq, but building new entitlements like the Medicare Part D, No Child Left Behind. There were a whole lot of other new social program government spending that a lot of conservatives were left looking at George W. Bush saying, this guy's not really a conservative, at least when it comes to deficits. So I think those criticisms are all on point and all valid. I guess, what piece he's missing is sort of the piece I mentioned just a minute ago. It's not so much once these entitlements are created, they grow and they grow and they grow, and there's nothing that can be done to trim them. So the actual the field in which we're playing in terms of available money, discretionary spending, keeps shrinking, and I think that's a big thing to look at. I mean, because again, we're looking at right now paying for. The reason it's shrinking, I'm not saying you ought to blame Bush, Reagan, whatever. I'm saying you ought to blame Lyndon Johnson. I mean, these are things that go back where these entitlements were created, in some cases in the 30s, 40s, in some cases in the 60s. And now it's coming home to roost because of the demographics and the baby boomers. And what it does is it keeps shrinking our available discretionary funding for the fun stuff like PBS and national parks and all that. Between that spending and then the interest on the debt, which again we've been pretty fortunate. I don't know what to say fortunate. There was sort of some design in it, but over the last 10 years, historically low interest rates have allowed us to skate on that a little bit. I think that's the piece that you also have to consider. It's not even so much what one president spends or one Congress spends. It is what gets put in there that will keep increasing forever and ever unless it's changed. And those entitlements are extremely, if not impossible, to change.
I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of that, but I guess the question that I would have then is it responsible for the party in power then, knowing that this is the case, is it responsible for the party in power to cut taxes and not cut spending? I mean, given the fact that, the Democrats tax and spend liberal type thing, we've heard that for, forever. Mm-hmm. Isn't it more responsible to tax and spend than it is to borrow and spend?
I would think so. Although, keep in mind, I mean, I understand where our listeners coming from in terms of saying tax cuts don't pay for themselves, and we can have a different debate on that. And I know where you are, and you know where I am, and a lot of it depends on things like various assumptions that you're baking into the system. But there was something else that Ronald Reagan once said, is that no country ever taxed itself into prosperity. And I think there's something for that to be said. Sometimes I would say it makes more sense to borrow and spend than to tax and spend. Can I show you all the math right now to back that up? No, but if you're able to borrow at low interest rates, that is probably a better thing to do than to create a drag on the economy through additional taxation, especially corporate taxation. I mean, so there's a lot of moving parts here. So what I'm saying is I would say never say never, but
No, and that's an important. I think that's an important point to make. In fact, there are some on the left who've actually made this point, saying that depending on what you do the spending on, it
Yeah,
might actually. But that again depends on the growth projections for that spending, and if you're just spending it on things that aren't going to grow the economy, then
and
you're
that
actually losing out.
yeah, and it goes also to things like you mentioned. He mentioned the corporate tax reform versus individual tax reform, and I think that makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
because changes in the corporate tax system are going to have much more dramatic effect on growth and on the economy than on the individuals, just because of one, the amount of money you're talking about, and two, corporations. That's their job. They have lawyers and accountants to figure out what's the most tax efficient thing to do, and your average person doesn't. I mean, it's if the average guy gets an extra $500 off of his taxes, well, it's good, and I think it's good for the economy, but it's nowhere uh, near the effect of if you change an incentive that has Apple move $1 trillion, from Ireland back to the U.S.
Right. Well, that
I don't know if it's not $1 trillion, but
but
I think the total amount
a lot of
I
money.
guess expatriated money is something in the neighborhood of like $3 trillion. I
Yeah,
think.
and you and I would disagree about what the effect of that actually would be in terms of how it gets reinvested, or does it
Sure.
create how many jobs, or does it just create value for shareholders and that sort of thing. But that's sort of another issue, related but another issue. Okay, I think we have time for one more listener question, and it
All
is
right.
from David, who writes, "Hi guys, it's my first time emailing, but I'm a long time listener. I think the frustration that people are having with Jay," there you go, Jay, this one's for
There we
you.
go. I was waiting for this one. We hadn't had one of
There
these
you go.
yet.
It's been
So
a while. The frustration people are having with Jay is that Jay never surprises. Mike and Trey don't often jump the aisle, but you can count on both of them to do just that at least once every few episodes. Jay never does. And when I say Jay never surprises, I mean that I can always predict exactly what position Jay will take, which is that he'll always carry water for an administration that, while Republican, is most decidedly not conservative. As a never Trump conservative myself, I see Jay's predictability as being indicative of the rot in the party's soul that has chased me from its ranks. Is this what my old party is reduced to, playing defense for a gang of high rollers that think all there is to economic policy is cutting taxes? I find it so disheartening that this is what conservatives are now settling for, because playing defense for Trump means making Trumpism the norm for the Republican Party. Jay's more Machiavellian than I am, so I guess it's something he's willing to go along with. At least, that's my view as to why Jay's been taking so much flack. He's kind of asking for it. So, Jay, what do you think? Are you asking for
I
it?
I am first. Yes, I am constant as the Northern Star. Um, No, again, I don't necessarily get a lot of these criticisms in that I think I'm plenty critical of Trump and plenty critical of Trump not being conservative. I think we talked about that. I wasn't on last week, but 2 weeks ago with the spending cap deal about how this sort of proves that Trump is no conservative. And I think I made the argument that this is policy-wise a bad thing. Politically, it's probably a good thing for him. It's not my job here to carry water for any particular administration, and I think I've also been pretty clear throughout this that I was not a Trump supporter, was not a Trump voter. I wouldn't say I'm a never Trumper, but I would say there were 16 other candidates who I would have preferred to him. So
Yeah.
that's where I am now. If you want to say tax cuts, well, that's really kind of a bread and butter Republican conservative issue going all the way back. I mean, that's sort of if you want to talk about what is one fundamental of the Republican Party's view, it's that the taxes ought to be lower and that lower taxes give greater opportunity to individuals and to businesses to live their own lives and to create their own prosperity, and that prosperity spills over to the economy as a whole. That's not a Trump thing. That is sort of Old Testament republicanism. So again, if somebody wants to wants to write in and say the particular issue where they think I'm carrying water for the Trump administration. I mean, please do, but because that's certainly not my intent. My intent in all this is usually to point out here's what the traditional conservative slash Republican view is. I'm kind of, which to most of our listeners is something new. I'm kind of like your Jewish friends who explains Hanukkah. I was thinking the other day, and that's kind of my
Yeah.
role here. But
Well, I think too, sometimes my sense is that when you explain what the administration's position is or what political strategy they might be pursuing, people can think that that's approval of that. When sometimes it's just sort of saying, "This is how I think
it's
they're thinking
analysis.
about this."
Yeah, this is
Exactly,
yeah.
and so there can be a distinction, an important distinction between those things. So there we go. All right, and I think obviously, sort of we have a kind of a common critique. The standard critique of me is that I don't go after you enough, and the standard critique of you is that you carry water for
I'm
the
just a pawn of
administration.
the Trump
So,
administration.
but anyway, I think that about does it. Just before we go, everyone, again, if you think that, I don't know, I'm carrying water, Jay, someone's carrying water, or you have any other complaint, critique, observation, we would really love to hear from you. Remember, there's that Politics Guys survey. Just go to politicsguys.com and take the survey. That's going to be extremely helpful. And also, if you could let us know if we do any of those annoying, like I said, food in the teeth sort of podcast equivalent things, that would be very helpful as well. Listener support is what keeps the show going. We truly appreciate it. And if you want to help us out, you can go to politicsguys.com/support. That's the direct link. Or just go to politicsguys.com and go to support in the main menu, or click on the Patreon or PayPal links you'll see on the page if you're looking at it on a laptop or a tablet. And subscribing to the show really does help, as does sharing episodes, whether it's to say you should totally check out this great podcast, or you wouldn't believe just the total rot that this
The
liberal idiot Mike was
outrageousness of this
talking,
guy. Yeah.
or anything in between. It's easy to do right in your podcast app. All you have to do is click on that little share symbol, usually a little triangle thingy. And because, word of mouth really is the best advertising, and we greatly appreciate it. And again, if you want to get in touch with us, mail at politicsguys.com. There's our Facebook page where you can message us and where we post stuff all week. That's facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter at politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show is produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday. We hope you'll join us.